Hello, CSS layers are a native feature to customize and configure the CSS specificity because normally the CSS precedence is related to the different factors like more strict and more complex CSS rules usually take the higher precedence, but with CSS layers it's much more easy. So for example, here I have an example. Here the syntax is called with the at layer, and this box which is in a paragraph inside the container, and the container has the blue background. Notice that there's another layer that tries to style this box as well, but it has actually the CSS rule is more strict and more powerful because it's in any alert inside the container, right? But if you check out this part, the background is blue. So this means that since the state is the layer after module, it takes the precedence. For example, it doesn't matter how strong this this rule is, the layer state always takes the precedence. So we can just change it, and you can see that you can just customize the layers, the layer order as well. So how it affects us in Prime, since Prime View 3.35, Prime ng 16.4, and Prime Rec 10, we have decided to wrap our styled mode CSS inside at layer like Prime View, Prime Rec, and Prime ng. So any CSS is wrapped inside a layer with the project name. That means you should be able to easily customize the Prime UI components without worrying about the CSS specificity. Maybe in the past we have faced with cases like your CSS is not getting applied to the components because the components are quite strong. For example, if you check out the drop-down item, we have styles like p drop-down space p drop-down item. That has high specificity, right? So if you try to just style p drop-down item, you had to maybe write some important or maybe some more complex rules, but not anymore. With CSS layers, it's just very easy. But there is one point to note here. Since your CSS, any kind of CSS, when you don't write any CSS without layer, it becomes the most powerful layer. The default layer is always the most powerful one. And you may accidentally, if you have some global styles, you may accidentally overwrite prime components as well. So here's an example. Suppose that you're using normalize, and the normalize has some sort of global styles that may affect the prime UI components. Not these ones, but maybe the button here or the inputs, because prime UI libraries use the buttons and inputs quite a lot. So let's try to get this part. For example, let's get normalize CSS and try to apply to our project. Here I will just write inside my layout normalize CSS. I just paste it here and then include that in my page, just adding to the application normalize, and let's see how it affects the components. Because we have, for example, here we had something like text area, we use text area and field set. Let's check that out. Also the buttons. Here you see that there's the buttons have overflow visible. You know that ripple effect? When you click on a button, a ripple effect is displayed. Maybe you can see it or not, but the ripple is actually going out the boundaries because the ripple container should have overflow hidden, but this one just overrides it. So whenever you push it, you should, maybe if I get into the dark mode, you should see it easily. Yeah, that's a problem. You might see issues with that. So also another case was, I think I've seen field set. The field set component uses, well, field set element. So here we may see that field set is actually has issues as well. So maybe something, a class like this, not the P, things like that. So we are just excluding, okay, these global styles are okay, but just don't worry about the prime view stuff or the prime other libraries. So here we have overflow inputs or things like that. So you just need to check out your global CSS when upgrading. So to watch out for things like that. Otherwise, your application may have cosmetic issues that you're just wondering where that comes from. So the trick I suggest is that first, for example, if we ignore this part, for example, if I just revert these, also the field set. So you've updated your application and your field sets are looking interesting. So what I would do is I would just go to the inspect and see and check out why my field set legend is. You see that the start mode themes are getting overridden by our normalized CSS. So paddings are gone and colors are gone. So that's one thing to watch out for. That's the easiest part to track it down, nail it down, is to use the inspector and find out what's going on. Of course, this applies to the start mode. With unstart mode, you are free to use with any CSS library. With unstart mode, these default styles are not included, so you are kind of free on, and you don't really worry about this a lot, but this only applies to the start mode. Okay, that was a note on CSS layers. It's a very handy feature, very powerful. And now you'll be able to override, in case you need to override some of the parts. Usually we suggest creating a custom theme, but in case you'd like to override some stuff, CSS layers are the way to go. That's a best practice, so that you don't need to scratch your head why my CSS is not getting applied to the prime component. But also there's a note to watch out. You should be able to watch out for your global CSS and make sure it's mostly anchors, buttons, and inputs. And maybe there's a field set and text area as well. So that's something to watch out, and make sure that you exclude the prime UI components from that. And this only applies to the start mode, as I mentioned. Okay, thank you for joining me, and see you on the next tutorial.